So we have our first ever student panel here with us. How awesome is that? You get to hear from gifted students themselves, not just educators talking about them. So we have Terry Bradley and her students, previous students that she worked with. She's a gifted education consultant specializing in social emotional aspects of giftedness. And she's the former GT coordinator at Fairview High School in Boulder. I'm going to go ahead and let her introduce who is here with her today because I want to get to your panel here. So thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And thank you to CAGT for hosting this event. It's a really, really great event for all of us, especially when we're shut inside because it's snowing. So what you see here is a group of us who went through 4 years at Fairview High School in Boulder together. I was the GD coordinator, and these students were willing participants in a weekly discussion lunch group that we would meet up. And over the 4 years, lots of ranting happened, lots of discussing about life and about school and anything that was valuable and important to discuss. We became connected after 4 years, and that connection has remained. And back in July, Rahul, he got us together again in a park. He said, let's all get together and reconnect. So a bunch of us got together, including other people and some who Zoomed in, and we just reconnected. We've been out of high school a couple of years, and it was really great to get their perspectives being out of high school at this point, because what I asked them was, if you were in high school at this time during this pandemic, what would you have needed from your teachers? How would it have been for you? And I think reflection, looking back on their high school years as college students now, I think it's very wise they have more wisdom being not immersed in the day-to-day of high school. And so I was so touched by the suggestions and the ideas they had that I felt that it needed to have a bigger venue. So I really appreciate CAGT giving us this venue. So that's why we're all here together. And very soon you're going to be hearing from the students, because I know that's who you want to hear from. But first of all, for those of you who know me, my number one idea of how to keep students connected is through discussion groups. Those of you who know me know that I would say that, right? But discussion groups are a way to connect, to help students process their feelings, feelings that they might not even know that they have, but when they're sitting with a group of other students who are also being vulnerable and authentic in their feelings, it really creates the space that a lot of our students need, especially at this time, because for many of us, we're so physically distant that it's important to remain empathetically close. And I think discussion groups can do that. So educators, whether you're doing this virtually or in class or meeting in a park like we did, I have some suggestions for how you can start that out. The students are going to model this for you, but those of you who remember the late, great George Betts taught us all about emotional temperatures. And so there wasn't a time that I met with these students or any of my students that we didn't first start out with, what's your temperature? So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, I'll explain. On a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the worst day of your life, 10 being the very best day of your life, and everything in between. What is your emotional temperature right now and why? And that's how we would always start our group discussions. And then we would get into the topic of the day, which we will do for you soon. But let's start out with introductions. I want the students to introduce themselves, share what your emotional temperature is today. And Zach, will you start us out?
I guess I drew a short straw at some point and forgot about it. Hi, my name is Zach Klaus. I'm studying mechanical engineering at CU Boulder right now. I'm a junior, like everyone except for Miss Bradley here. And I think today my emotional temperature is a 10 because it's the first snow of the season, and snow is something that is, well, I don't know, biking through it was just very magical. So I think I'll pass that off.
Yeah, I'll go next. I'm Stephanie. I'm studying computational biology at MIT right now, also a junior, like everyone else. I'd say my emotional temperature today is probably like a 6.5, just because school is starting to pick up and it's not as fun as it was during the first couple days.
Right, I can go next. Hi, I'm Rahul. I study computer science and math at UT Austin. I'd say my emotional temperature today is like maybe like an 8.5 or 9, just because, like Zach said, I really love the snow. Since I've been in Texas for 2 years, that's something I've been missing out. So even though it's come a bit early this year, that's really exciting. And then I'm also just really excited to be here as well. So
I can go next. I'm Peter Kennedy. I am a junior at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. I'm studying music and mathematics. And I would say my emotional temperature today is around 6, a little bit low. Even though it is the first snow of the year, I haven't been able to enjoy it going outside because school has been very intense right now. Kind of burning the candle at both ends, trying to, you know, figure out logistical things for different groups I'm a part of and complete assignments and everything like that. But there's snow, so happy to go around.
And I'll finish out. So I'm Ella Worsnick. I'm a junior in electrical engineering at University of Colorado Boulder. I would say my temperature today is somewhere between a 6 and a 7, because also I love the snow, like some other people said. And I was a little bit more proactive this week and then not as stressed out as I was last week. But I do not like online school so much, so that's just like a constant challenge to deal with, but that's where I am.
Okay. So students, thank you for sharing your temperatures with a bunch of strangers. I'm sure that's the first time you've ever done that before. It's the first time I've ever asked you to do that before too, I'm sure. So educators, once you have, your students have shared their temperatures, there's going to be a lot of common ground, as you noticed with these students today, and there also other people are feeling other things that may come to the surface and may not. Always give students the option to pass. If they aren't feeling it and they don't want to share how they're feeling because their feelings are too close to the surface, then that's okay, because the process is where they're going to gain the value, and it might just be in hearing what other people have to say. Doesn't mean they have to be speaking out, but just being in that environment with people sharing their feelings is very, very valuable. So, all right. So after you have, with your students, shared emotional temperatures, you can get into your discussion topic of the day. Students, let's just get into it right now. Our discussion topic for the day is to help our audience who has tuned in, the educators, the counselors, the GT coordinators, the administrators who are going through the process you're going through right now with online learning and how different everything is. So here's the question. Can you share some helpful strategies for educators working with secondary students during this unprecedented time? And Ella, do you want to start us out?
Yeah, so I think that the most important thing, the place to start would be, what is the purpose? And that could be, what is the purpose of school? What is the purpose of this class? What is the purpose this year specifically? What is the purpose this semester? And I think this is always an important question, but I think it's particularly important to revisit right now because so much is different and so much we can't just recreate. It's not, I don't think very useful to just try and take the old model of an in-person class, sort of like the classic like lecture, and then take a time test and just shove it online. I don't think that's a very effective way to do it, because working virtually, whether it's teaching virtually or for the students learning virtually, is a very different process. And so I think it's important to be creative in the way that you teach and interact with students this year. And I think it's very important to be authentic in that creativity and be upfront with the students and just say, like, you know, this semester we're not going to have as many tests. This semester we're going to try and do projects and be flexible. And then I think then the students will respond to that. And students want to learn. I truly believe that the students want to learn. So if you let them come at this year in the semester just like with the open, like an open mind and a creative mind of how can we learn this class or this subject this year, like I think the students will respond to that. And there's many different ways to do that, and I'm sure some other people will get into this, but that can be many different things. That can be projects, that can be sending out videos done by other people, that can be having a flipped classroom and you have to watch your lectures beforehand and then discuss in class. It can be many different ways to do it. And I think it's important also to just do things because you think they're a good idea and you think you can do them effectively. They find that there's new ways to teach things, like for instance, new ways to teach math. And the thing is that no one way to teach math is correct. It's whether the teacher thinks that it's a good way to teach math and they're excited about it and they're willing to work with their students, and then the students are going to be excited about it and willing to work on it and willing to learn it. And so it's very much less about the specific details and more about just coming at school with the intent to teach the students and with the intent to let them learn how they learn and to come out in a very authentic way and not worry so much about trying to just recreate a stereotypical classroom. That's what I would say. If anyone else wants to jump in.
I guess a little bit. I think those are all great ideas, and I wanted to maybe call attention to the idea that the students, I think a lot of students do want to to continue and to learn and keep doing that. But I think there are ways that you can, I guess, facilitate their willingness to sort of take their own responsibility and to do it themselves. And I've noticed this particularly in the transition from high school to college. One of the big things is at high school you have class from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and it's kind of just go, 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 and everyone's doing it. Everyone is engaged the whole time. But in college, there's a lot less class time during the day. So the students have to take on much more responsibility for their own learning, maybe reading the textbook outside of class more than they would do in high school, or meeting separately with a group project, something like that. So I think it might be difficult, at least if I'm thinking on my time in high school, I might have found it difficult to take on that own responsibility for myself in making sure that I'm pushing myself to get things done. I'm pushing myself during class to stay engaged and stay working. So particularly if you're using something like breakout rooms, for instance, to say, okay, students, now it's time to go into your own breakout rooms and to work on this for a little while. I think it's easy to fall into the trap of saying, okay, well, let's go into breakout rooms for maybe an hour and let's work on this project, get as much done as you can, and then we'll come back and see how we are. And that's a pretty open-ended suggestion that might work really well in an in-person setting where there's a sort of atmosphere in the room of productivity, and students might be looking around the room and saying, oh, well, that group's being really productive, maybe I should be working hard too. But in a breakout room, it's kind of separated, so a student might be not as productive and not as motivated to get it done. And I've found that the best way to stay productive in those kinds of situations is to create a more concrete expectation of what should get done, during that period of time. So for instance, say, okay, well, let's go away for maybe 10 minutes rather than a full hour, and try to get problems 1 through 5 completed. And that gives a more concrete expectation of, okay, this is what I should be getting done during this time. So I better get it done before the 10 minutes run out. So I guess find ways to encourage the students to take on their own responsibility for getting work done, I think would be a helpful tool to help, keep their learning going.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with a lot of what Peter was saying. It's, I think for in this setting, right, it's a lot of what Ella was saying as well, that we shouldn't really just take what we already do in like in-person settings, just bring it straight into try to adapt it to an online environment. I don't think that, I think virtual learning is just worse for everyone, for the educators and the students. But I'm hoping that, a lot of what we do in the virtual setting will also, like the fact that we'll now have to be creative, coming up with ideas, that you'll have to sort of facilitate this different environment. Hopefully that'll start changing things in person as well. So like, for example, I'm the kind of person that probably did well when it was like a very standard lecture test setting kind of classroom, but that kind of thing really doesn't work. So if you do test, maybe you can do like, open note or like longer take home test kind of things that, maybe you can try to think about things like, oh, instead of it being like a 60-minute test, maybe it can be open book, and we're going to have harder problems that make you critically think more and reason about things. But instead of it just being what you would do in the traditional classroom setting. Ella gave a bunch of really great examples about how different ideas you could use for bringing it into virtual settings, like the flipped classroom, making things more project based. I think, and it was exactly what Peter was saying, allowing the students to take the learning into their own hands. Because I think, I think that students, it's exactly what they said. I think a lot of students want to learn, and they have the drive to learn. And if you give them a little more opportunity for them to take it upon themselves, and also being able to choose certain, like what they learn within certain guidelines, like, here's a unit, but you can choose something you're interested within that unit and doing your own project on that. I think that could hopefully make a lot of people much like they might want to do that more than, and they might be more receptive to that than just, oh, sit down, take a 1-hour test and then just regurgitate what you learned from lecture yesterday kind of thing.
And so what Rahul was talking about too is a really great way to see this as not necessarily just a challenge, because obviously it's challenging, but there's also a great deal of opportunity here to try new things in pedagogy that perhaps you wouldn't want to try because they're a risk or because it simply might not work. But this entire semester, or probably this whole school year, is in of itself a risk, and there are going to be things that don't work. So that seems, at least to me, to be an excellent opportunity to try and shake up things that have been established in education for a long time, that, they're not necessarily bad per se, but perhaps overused. I know testing comes up a lot in this argument. That's a whole can of weasels. But this is a great opportunity to try things, like switching around how a classroom is structured, or seeing what it's like if you reduce the syllabus, because scope creep is certainly something that happens, and it's something that's happened just in education as a whole. So if you back off on what, if you give perhaps a little bit of detail in the syllabus and give students a little bit of free range, obviously their structure is useful for a lot of people. I know a lot of us really like having some degree of scheduling built in, but this is an opportunity to try things where the scheduling is maybe a little bit more self-paced, where perhaps you trade off a little bit of course material for appreciation of the material, because that's something that sometimes gets overlooked. And if a student never really has a justification why this is, important. They're not going to be engaged, and sometimes if you back off the pressure a little bit, you actually get better performance from those students because they have personal vested interest, and that's something that this year might actually offer an excellent opportunity to attempt.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with everything that everyone said. And I think something that I've been thinking of as all these people have been talking is the idea where, like, in person, if something's going really wrong with a student, it's a lot easier for either you as a teacher to figure out or like one of their friends to point out. Like, I remember in high school when I was having a bad day, one of these guys would probably notice and be like, hey, is everything like okay? Like, let's talk. And that's a lot harder, obviously, in the virtual environment. I think even with figuring out how well students are following in class materials, it's something that you can't necessarily tell as well just by hosting like a Zoom call or whatever. And so I think there's a big element of also kind of having those check-ins with students in a more like individual level of making sure that they're following along material and making sure that things are going okay, like not necessarily with school, but like also at home, that they have a productive environment to do work, all that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of students obviously have very, very different needs. In in-person environment, I think it's a lot easier to adapt to those. But I think in the virtual environment, as my colleagues / peers have been saying, you need to be a lot more creative with how you can be kind of more adapting to all these people's individual needs. Like, for example, I'm the kind of person who finds it really, really difficult to focus. And like, as they were talking, like, if you're in an environment where everyone else is being productive, I'm going to be more productive. But I'm sitting at home alone, like on my computer, I'm obviously just going to go on my phone and not pay attention to class. And so finding out different ways that you can kind of engage students based on their kind of personal needs is something that I think is really important.
Really good points. And I've been taking notes. Do you have any other thoughts as each of you were talking? Did anything else come up? Like, oh yeah, and I also wanted to mention something else. Anything else?
Actually, yeah, I was just gonna say something. What Stephanie just mentioned about like check-ins with students. One of my classes this semester is actually, we have like a weekly check-in. It's due Friday at midnight, and it's just it's like a really open-ended thing, and it's really short. It doesn't take much time, but it's like, you can write a paragraph, you could record a video, or just like a voice recording or something. So you don't even necessarily have to write it. And it's just like, either like engage a little bit with the material this week, like what did you learn, what did you find interesting, anything you're struggling with. And then if there's not much there, then it's also a question of like, how are other classes going? Is there anything in particular, any feedback for like the professor, like any feedback for me, anything that you think could be done better? And I think it's really useful because then it kind of like, it's not hard, but it's like, I'll at the end of the week, I'll be like, oh, how was this class this week? Like where do I stand on that? And where do I stand on my classes in general? And it's just kind of like a way to stay a little bit more engaged, because it's really easy when everything's online to just kind of forget that time and space exists and that like there's a real educator on the other side reading what you're turning in and everything. And so it can be very, I think, useful to sort of have something like that where it's easy, but it's like, as Stephanie was saying, a way to just kind of like check in where you usually could just kind of see them in person or notice that someone's having trouble. Like, we don't have the option anymore. So that there's like other ways that you can sort of continue that. And I think that's really important.
Any other thoughts? Go ahead, Peter.
I was just thinking, someone, I forget exactly who said it, but I think someone mentioned the importance of being adaptable in how you're structuring the class or the curriculum. I usually sing in a choir back at Lehigh, and we've been trying to keep that up a little bit with trying to send in recordings and compile it all into a big video. And we met a couple times over the summer. I'm one of the executive people in the choir. So we met a couple times over the summer to try to plan how we're going to do it. how are we going to try to do rehearsals? It's not, you know, it can't really be the same. And what we're finding, we're a couple weeks into the semester now, what we're finding is that most of the plans that we tried to come up with over the summer are very different than how it's actually going to turn out, because actually having the students there, the singers in my case, in the Zoom call and trying to have our plans play out, some of it works, a lot of it is, you know, it needs to be changed. So we're still trying to iron out the best way to do it, and just trying to be flexible with how we, you know, with the feedback that we hear from people saying, you know, this works, this really didn't work. You know, I don't really like how that played out, but, you know, things like that, that I think it's it was helpful to try to plan beforehand, but it's definitely not set in stone as the semester starts. So that was just another little thing.
So I may have sent you all this quote. It really resonated with me, and I'd really love to hear your take on this. This is not something you planned. I'm throwing one out there for you. I want you to think on your feet here. But the quote was, we shouldn't go into this school year with 2019 goals. This is 2020. Have 2020 goals. So would each of you weigh in with what you think those goals should be? One or two words or a phrase or whatever comes to mind. 2020 goals for school.
I can start, I guess. I really liked what Stephanie and Ella were saying about how you need to check up on them, and like a lot of like I understand 2020 is, like I mentioned earlier, 2020 is hard for everyone, for the students, for the instructors, everyone. So I think it's even more important for to make sure we check in with the students and, like, you know, check in on things like their mental health, how they're doing, if they have a comfortable place to study, just having, even trying to facilitate one-on-one meetings. I think that just more so maybe than like the content of your curriculum, mental health, their stability, everything, I feel like that's really, really important this year.
Yeah, I think kind of in a similar vein, I think like because life is kind of just so crazy right now, it is like, it's kind of crazy that we're even prioritizing school in some ways when there's so many other things going on in the world. And I think in that sense, the goal isn't necessarily about making this the best school year academically, but making sure that in a lot of ways, school is the way that a lot of students are connecting now, since, you know, socially distanced and you're not seeing everybody anymore. So making sure that you're providing a really great place for people to connect and still have those social interactions and feel like they're not just being like isolated in this crazy, crazy world. And so I don't necessarily think academics and being like doing really, really well and like getting all these test scores or wherever is the best goal. I think it is about just trying to normalize life in the best way you can.
Yeah, and Stephanie, I think one perhaps tangible way, tactile way you can approach that, especially as an educator, is an acceptance of failure. In part because it's kind of inevitable this semester. Things are going to go wrong. We're seeing this already, and I think everybody's has a class or something just went, you know, completely did not go as expected, and that is both a necessity right now, but also potentially a really good learning opportunity, and a really good thing to model for students, because there's not a lot of opportunities where students can fail at something quite catastrophically and not have it be truly catastrophic for them. I know for all of us, you know, failing a test would have been not great. And this year, perhaps building, I wouldn't say trying to build that in, because obviously you don't want to push people to fail, but building a community and a mindset, this is, you know, sometimes things just don't work, and focusing on that as part of even your class could be a really powerful motivator and assistant to a lot of students.
I think it's interesting when we were talking about what 2020 goals we might want to have. is that sometimes we don't really know what we want, or we don't really know what we need, especially if we're not familiar with this kind of environment. So I think it's in trying to figure out what those are, to say, you know, maybe we shouldn't focus on some of the other goals. Maybe we need some new ones right now. Sometimes we don't even know what those will be. So, you know, finding out what those are through things like meetings with students, or check-ins with how things are going, and just being cognizant of how how things are shaping up and how everything's playing out is important to really know, to be able to figure out what those 2020 goals are before you can try to realize them.
Yeah, and just sort of to add a little bit, something that hasn't really come up before. When I was in 11th grade, it was the 2016 election, and the day after the election was a Thursday, which meant we had extended classes, so like hour-and-a-half classes, and I had US history, and my teacher just sat on the desk in the front of the classroom and said, "Do you have any questions?" And we just talked for an hour and a half about the way the government works and civic duty and voting and all of these things. And someone partway through was like, "Why are we doing this? We have stuff to learn. Like, we can't waste an hour and a half." And he was like, "You know, you're going to forget a lot of things you learned in this class, but," he's like, "if you can come out of it just understanding a little bit more of the real world, I would be happy." And I think that kind of applies more broadly this year, because, I mean, there's just so much crazy stuff happening that, like, sometimes it's not, as people were saying, sometimes the most important thing is not learning all of this content, and some of it is just, like, if you can learn enough of an introduction to get some kids interested, and if you can have a class that's not a big stress, like, people are going to be excited to be there. And if you can have something that's not just like a place and a time in kids' life that's not just adding, and that's like a little bit of a either explaining relevance, and also just like, I don't know, a place that's just not another stressor, because there's a lot of stressors. And I think it's particularly important to just like create that environment that's not just so focused on a syllabus, particularly this year.
I like your perspective so much, because I feel like I fed you my feelings, and you've just, you know, regurgitated everything I was thinking, but you did it so much better than I would have. Coming from you, it was very valuable. But everything you've talked about is the social and emotional needs, and how we have got to have that in place before anything else is going to work, before school, academics. We really have to support the students, checking up on students, their mental health, the one-on-one meetings, everything that you said. Because I would have said, in answer to that, the most important goals for me as an educator, for you all, if we were together still in high school, would be connection, mental wellness, and maintaining relationships. Basically, that's what you just said. So I really love that. And I also want to mention something. When we were in the park back in July, these students said something that just really stayed with me, because I'm the person that always brought in the picture books into the discussion group, because here's what they said. I said, "What are some of the things that you remember that we did?" Well, I love the way you said it. I wrote it down, that it was mildly embarrassing in an endearing way that I would read you picture books, because hopefully it takes you back. The intent of bibliotherapy is to take you back to an easier, less stressful time of life, even as secondary students, right? High school, middle school. I mean, this one in particular, the Wolf's Chicken Stew, it's all about empathy. I'm just going to show you some of my favorite ones. Westlandia, about being yourself. Many of you probably have these on your shelves. The Fourth Little Pig, remember this one? About being a leader. And The Paper Bag Princess, about outsmarting adversity. Cinder Edna, resiliency. And I mean, we gotta get a Dr. Seuss in here. Oh, the places you'll go, because you all still have a future. There is still a wonderful future out there for all of you, all of our students. And we need to be mindful of that. We've got to be realistic about where we are, but we also have to be thinking about this too shall pass, and there are some wonderful things ahead. So, so at this point, I want to ask Elizabeth if we've gotten any questions, unless you have anything else to share out there. Okay, Elizabeth, are there any questions?
Hi all, I'm so bummed that I took my video off so I wouldn't be an imposter in your panel. But I was just sitting here the whole time. I wish you could have seen me like, yes, 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 I agree. And really almost brought me to tears, because I think as educators, sometimes we don't feel permission to do exactly what you are saying is most important, and to hear it from students' mouths that this is what we need can be so powerful. To help that educator who feels like I have to meet these standards and I have to move these students forward and all this pressure. It just, again, Ella, you said it at the very beginning and I wrote it down. What is the purpose? Like, I think we're having to reevaluate what is the purpose of education? What is the purpose of a teacher and a student and this community, and everything that we've just kind of accepted as this is how life goes and this is what we do, and the flexibility and permission to say what is our purpose, and what you said, how can we be more flexible? We have more permission now than ever to think outside of the box or do something differently and maybe fail. But we're all figuring this out together as teachers, students, parents, everyone. That's part of that. I did just see a question come in. This one is from Joanne. She said, what can parents and teachers do to encourage these open and authentic connections? I know you talked about the one-on-one with Zoom if you can't be in person. Any ideas of what that could look like? What would be most meaningful to you to have someone reach out and try to create that connection and have it feel authentic?
The first thing that comes to mind is for the educator or the parent or whoever it is to be authentic themselves for that student, and to say, okay, well, this is what I'm hoping for from you in some respect, and to just do that kind of thing and say, you know, I'll share my feelings. This is how I'm feeling today. This is, you know, even just something like emotional temperatures, having everyone, including the educator or the parent or whoever that is, to do that as well. And I think that sort of opens the space to allow the students to do that, and gives them the freedom to say, okay, well, I don't have to be the first one, or something like that. So yeah, just modeling what you're hoping for.
I think also just like, I guess this is more for an educator, but this can also apply to parents. Just if you show a genuine willingness to want to help the person. So I think if you just kind of approach it like maybe like a little bit more, you're trying to distance yourself from the student, or you're like, I have too many students, whatever happens. I think just trying to show yourself as, look, I know it's tough. I know we're all going through a lot. I'll try to make this the best I can. I might fail a bunch, and we're going to try things out, but I want to make this as enjoyable of an experience as I can. I don't want to make this stressful for you guys. I just want to help out however I can. I think just showing that genuine authenticity to want to help the other person, the student, is what I think that would go a long way.
Along with that, I would also say that like in college, obviously there's a lot of office hours that professors have, and in high school we had like a little bit, I forget what we called them, but also just that being like, you know, maybe you only have 30 minutes of whole class on Zoom, but you say like after that next 30 minutes, it's just questions. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the class. And it kind of gives students a time to sort of, like, it's an open opportunity for them to engage. And if, like, as Rahul and Peter were saying, if the educator, the parent comes at that sort of opportunity being authentic, I think that students will respond to that, just being given the opportunity.
Yeah, I think there's also a big element of like making sure that there are no expectations. So first of all, making sure, like, as Ms. Bradley mentioned at the beginning, like if a student wants to pass on temperatures, that's fine. Like making sure that there is no expectation to necessarily share a bunch of things that they want to. And then beyond that, I think, especially from like the educator point of view, if you're asking something like, what in this class is going well, like what can I do better? Making sure that it's kind of separated from like the academic side of things. I think a lot of students are scared to say something that their professor or teacher did wrong because they're worried that it'll affect the way that they are viewed in the class, or like maybe affect their grade or something like that. And so making it very, very clear that there is no expectation for like a right or wrong answer, and that in the sense, like, there is no right answer and everything that is right is what you share. And so in that sense, just making it very, very open-ended in a way that people feel comfortable sharing rather than thinking that's something that they need to say.
Yeah, and one thing that this might look like, what one particular memory I had, I never really went to office hours, because at some level it felt weird, walking into the teacher's office, and I would go in if there was some sort of reason for class, and often wind up talking about this sort of thing. And a memory that really comes to mind was working on, I think it was the extended essay, which in of itself was nothing in particularly educationally huge for me, but going in and talking to was it Mr. Peoples? It was my history teacher, and going in and showing him some work I did and having him talk to me, but not in a grading manner, more like a validation of work. That was a particularly powerful way to initiate that sort of discussion. So perhaps a more projects-based education might work well in this kind of situation as well.
Anyone else?
Have a,
okay, go ahead, Terry.
I've got another question for them. One of the quotes that we talked about in our lunch group was the Mark Twain quote, "I never let schooling get in the way of my education." Just going to sit with that for a minute. I never let schooling get in the way of my education. So many educators and parents, people are stressed out about what their students are not getting in school with the changes this year. Can you help rest their fears at all? Have you learned anything outside of school? Are you continuing to be self-motivated in things you want to learn and seek to, can you just talk to us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I think the word of advice I can think of, and I think you might actually have told me this, Ms. Bradley, is there is so much more going on in school. Inconceivable amount of human experience and human knowledge and research and art, and recognizing that and also putting school into context with it is a very useful way, because it's easy to get worked up about tests and scores and grades and whatever. But if you relax on that a little bit, there's a whole host of, like personally for me, I study a lot of traditional metalworking techniques and martial arts. Not something you'll ever come across in any kind of high school, but it's something where I'm continuously self-motivated to do. So engaging people and finding what they're drawn to, and a lot of times we suppress it too. We don't try to acknowledge it because it's getting in the way of education, or in the way of school, I should say. That can be something that's very useful to validate those interests.
Yeah, when I was in high school and middle school and just growing up, my mom always said, like, you're going to school to learn how to problem solve, not to actually learn anything. I never really understood what she meant until like last year, this year, finally kind of having that reflective side of things. And I think it is really easy to get caught up in like the grades and the homework and everything and think all I'm here is just to learn the facts and to understand the facts. When in reality, like here I am, like 2, 3 years out of high school, and I probably don't remember most of the things I learned. But what I do remember is like the tough thing, like the tough situations where I had to learn how to problem solve, learn how to deal with situations on my own, both in like social context, but also like presented with a really difficult homework problem. What do I do? And I think, as we mentioned at the beginning, I think Zach mentioned it, this is the time to challenge those norms. And I think this is really the time to make the learning not about like, this is a fact, memorize it, and then you're never going to need to know this again because you don't really care. But more along the lines of like, now we're in this situation where we realize like problem solving is something that's really important. So how can we foster that? And how can you really apply different techniques and like learning different ways of getting stuck and figuring out how to get yourself out of that? Yeah.
Along with that, I would say I learned very little from my classes, and I learned a lot from my teachers. I like, it's the same thing. I don't remember particularly many specifics of what I learned unless I have to use them now anyway, but then I would have just re-looked them up anyway. But I talked to my teachers a lot in high school, and I've tried to do it in college as well, talking to my professors, and it's just, educators have a lot of knowledge. I mean, they're educating people, and I think that it's fantastic to have conversations not constrained by you have to learn XYZ for a test. And so I think like now is the time to try and foster that, because now is the time that nobody's really expecting everyone to have the same like output as you usually do every year. And so I think that like, I don't know, I can see how it could be hard for teachers to get kids to come talk to them, but I think just like having that opportunity, because usually you can like just go up to a teacher before or after class, and now it's harder. So just like, again, just like coming at it authentically and like giving them that opportunity, because I truly gained so much from talking to my teachers in high school. And there are things that I think about to this day. And I don't think I would have gotten that if I had just only gone to class. I would not have gotten as much out of it.
Yeah, and I actually kind of quickly want to add on to that, because Ella reminded me of something that I was thinking about but didn't like explicitly say. Is like one of the biggest things I learned in high school was how to ask for help. And I think something that's really, really hard for people to do. Obviously, you guys are probably aware of this because we're all human, and asking for help is kind of difficult, and admitting that vulnerability. And I think that's the thing that I learned in high school is like, I can't do this on my own. I have to ask for help from other people. And I think that is kind of the biggest thing, is making sure that you're fostering an environment where people don't feel uncomfortable asking for help, so that it is a thing to ask for help. Because again, like you can't just stay after class and just ask your teacher a question. You have to physically reach out or do something like that, because there is no like sitting in a classroom and just like walking up to the teacher.
I'm going to touch upon something, I guess, a lot of that hasn't really been mentioned, but I think for a large portion of high school students, a big concern that they have, and of course this doesn't apply to everyone, a big concern they have beyond the education is, what can I do to get into college? So like the grades, like the tests especially, I think, I mean, we've, the five of us have spoken at length about, we have beef with like the testing system, all of this stuff. That's a whole can of worms for another day. But I think we don't know how college admissions is going to look like whenever that happens. And I think I think a big thing is if the students don't have to stress about grades, in terms of they don't have to stress about, oh, what happens if I fail this test on a given day, then hopefully that leads them to want to seek out more information on the subject rather than being forced to do it and being like, oh, okay, and then immediately forgetting it after the test. So I think, what am I trying to say? A big thing is that if you can sort of push it into the mindset less of I have to go to school so I can get into college, but more of I'm going to school. This goes back to the purpose thing, that I'm going to school. There's the grades portion that has to happen just because of the way school is. But if we can sort of move that less and less out of the picture and more towards facilitating a relationship with the educator, doing group projects to sort of get that social aspect, and just having a really great environment that they can come to the lectures, or not lectures, but the meetings and whatnot, and just have the view of, I'm going to learn something today. I'm not going to be pressured by all these external factors in my future, but I just want to learn something for fun. I think that could assuage a lot of fears that the students have, and hopefully again lead away from I'm going to study for this test and forget it, and more towards this is something that's interesting to me that I can spend some time on and just learn about.
And I think that's what a lot of you have talked about, purpose and ownership. Like, why do I care about this? Why is this important to me? We have time for one last question that a viewer typed in. They want to know, Valerie wants to know, has the practice of taking your emotional temperature carried over into your life now in college, or has it morphed into a different way to gauge your mental health?
I think in high school, I never really stopped to think about like how I was feeling until like that one day a week when Miss Bradley would be like, okay, what's your temperature? And every time I talked to her, we would start and she'd say, okay, like, how are you feeling? What's your temperature? And I think that idea of just like stopping to think about it is something that I've really taken into college, of just making sure that I'm really, really stressed, I'm really worried about something, or maybe I like yell at one of my friends, and then stopping to think about like, why did I do that? What am I feeling? What's causing all of this like emotion in my head? So that's something that's definitely carried over in that way.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely, it definitely has carried over. But I think the main difference that I guess I feel between the two, taking the temperatures in high school and how that's carried forward, is that in high school it was more of sort of an explicit way of saying, of sort of just stopping to think, and assigning a number is a very active activity. Like it's not you have to think about to actually make it happen. So it was a kind of a structured way of learning how to think about my own mental state. And in college, I would say it has carried forward, but in a more abstract way, in a more just passive evaluation, where I don't, sometimes it sort of comes more naturally as a way of evaluating where I am, rather than having a particular number assigned. So it's definitely helped in just the everyday going through life. But yeah.
I agree with that, and to like it becoming a little more abstract. I would also say I'm very lucky with my group of friends in college, but one of the questions that comes up is like, what do you need right now? And more of in sense like, do you need to do your homework, or is it okay if this one time you don't complete it? You turn it in and you get a 50%, and that's better than 0. And I think like having that sort of attitude in a conversation, like particularly between friends, has been very helpful, because it's less like in high school. It's like you have to do everything, and it's like you must do it. There's no other option. But and I think some of that carries over to college. But like the people that I know, it's really great that it's sort of a common question. I could word that better, but oh well. To just say like, what do you need? How are you doing? What do you need as a person right now, as opposed to what do you need to turn in? Because those are sometimes very different things. And like in the end, if you don't turn in one homework assignment, it's not the end of the world. Like going to be fine. And I think that that is like kind of a way that temperatures has continued a little bit in my life, but I think it's just like all of it is very, temperatures I think are a really good way to start. I agree with what Stephanie said, where it's just like a very good structured way to sort of like understand what it means to check in and figure out where you are.
And the intent, of course, is just because you are also go, go, go all the time in high school, and so many responsibilities and requirements and things to do. It's stopping and breathing and reflecting. How am I right now? Because how often do you ever ask yourself that if nobody comes right out and asks you? So, but putting all that together, Zach, you had said about going in high school and having a conversation with your teacher and how you didn't want to go into the teacher's office. And then Ella, what you said, Stephanie, what you said, my recommendation now for all the educators out there and counselors, of course, mental health professionals, is for them to schedule a time one-on-one with each of their students and say, what do you need right now? I mean, that just seems obvious, right, with this conversation that we've had today. And that's exactly what it boils down to is, what do you need right now? Ella, I'm really glad you mentioned that. That's a really good way to carry this message forward to the audience.
Yeah, I am so impressed by all of you. Man, I wish I could have been a part of your group in high school. I would have enjoyed it so much. Terry, we might need a list of the books that you recommend, even for these high school students. We'd love to know some of those titles. So thank you so much for being here with us tonight, taking time out of your busy school schedule right now, figuring it all out virtually. We appreciate it. Just for all of you still with us tonight, Seth Perler will be presenting with us next week. He's an executive function coach and vlogger out of Boulder. So he will be talking about how to help your 2E and complex gifted students be successful with different ideas around executive function. And we look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks so much.